But it wasn't until like later on in my teens, just before I went to med school, that I was actually taught how to make like actual recipes. Because I think it was when I went to med school, my mum basically sat me down and was like, "You're gonna have to cook for yourself now, so you need to know like this general skill set." So I think it was drilled into me that not only is it important to like appreciate food and eat well, it's also a life skill that everyone should have to be able to cook for themselves. Just did I want to be able to give the sort of blessings of how to cook food that's going to be preventative in terms of the medicinal value to every sort of person who comes into contact with the recipe. So how do you actually speak to yourself in the environment that is in your mind? I think that's really, really important, and we that really doesn't get enough attention. It's very external. It's like, okay, this person is telling me about this food and that's bad for me. Actually, you should be able to tolerate your external environment by looking up your internal environment.
So hi Rupy,
That's
welcome
all
to
right.
Millennial Mind.
Hey Shivani, lovely to meet you, and yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on and talk all about your journey. But I wanted to start with the beginning. So were you always interested in food?
Yeah, so I think growing up in a household where my mum was like a massive foodie, she always had like different things on the table. We'd always be watching like the food channel. We'd be eating a range of different cuisines. We've always been sort of obsessed with food, and but it wasn't until like later on in my teens, just before I went to med school, that I was actually taught how to make like actual recipes because mum was sort of like the matriarch in the kitchen and the household, generally, but like especially the kitchen. So yeah, she sort of took control of everything. But that was sort of where I got my creative start from, I guess.
And how did you become interested in that? Because I think a lot of people watching and listening to this will be thinking, yeah, my mum is the one that cooks all the time or makes all the recipes, and almost if it's done for you and it's so nice, where does that interest kind of spark from?
I think it was when I went to med school, my mum basically sat me down and was like, "You're gonna have to cook for yourself now, so you need to know like this general skill set." So I think it was drilled into me that not only is it important to like appreciate food and eat well, it's also a life skill that everyone should have to be able to cook for themselves. And I think maybe even today it's become less of a need considering we have food at the touch of a button. There's so much availability of food, particularly if you're living in an urbanized environment. um, but I think it's still really important to get those fundamental principles of flavor building, of cooking from scratch. I think it's very much ingrained in our DNA to be able to source and prepare food. So yeah, that was sort of like why it was really important for me. And I guess I was lucky when I went to med school. I lived in a household with a whole bunch of foodies, and they're all guys as well. So like we'd have like barbecue cook-ups at the weekend. We would experiment with like spice blends. We would do all different types of cuisines. We're like from various different backgrounds. One of the guys was Middle Eastern. One of the guys was English. One of the guys was another sort of Indian Pakistani background. So yeah, no, I was lucky in that respect as well that I had some sort of like peers who were also interested in this sort of element of cooking and the creative pursuit.
So how did you move from being a full-time doctor to then becoming a full-time chef? Is that what I'd call you?
I don't call myself a chef actually. A lot of people do, but I think like I call myself like a home cook, right? So a chef is someone with a unique set of skills that can manage a kitchen, can operate within the hierarchy of how a kitchen runs. You have your sous chef, your pot wash, your waiting staff, your manager, your front of house, like all these different things, and you've got to like bang out covers anywhere between 50 covers a night to like hundreds of covers a night. So that sort of operational mindset is what I regard as like a chef. I'm like a recipe creator slash home cook. I'm someone who wants to get into the mindset of a novice cook who just wants to eat delicious flavorful food that like excites them as food should do, and b can cook on a budget and healthy food that we know is going to be nourishing them on a day-to-day basis. So someone who doesn't have like the set of skills that you would from like maybe an amateur cook or someone who's like truly interested. I want to be able to give the sort of blessings of how to cook food that's going to be preventative in terms of the medicinal value to every sort of person who comes into contact with a recipe. So yeah, that's sort of how I would regard myself. And to answer your question, so long story short, I got ill when I was a junior doctor. I used to suffer from a heart condition called atrial fibrillation. That kind of led me down and to do a deep dive into nutritional medicine and how why was this happening? First of all, there wasn't ever a diagnosis as to what the triggers were, but also B, I was able to revert it with the diet and lifestyle approach, something that I wasn't taught at med school. And so that led me to do a big deep dive into what evidence base there was there. And actually, in doing that and having more conversations with patients, I realized there was a real need to teach people the basics and the principles of cooking, but also how we can sort of upskill everyone so they can protect their health and prevent the sort of tidal wave of lifestyle-related illnesses that plague multiple healthcare systems across the world. So that's sort of the way in which I fell into this industry, and then, as most people do, started on social media, and that was it.
It's interesting you said you did a deep dive into nutritional health, because I think with the overload of information that's out there, a lot of people feel like they're doing a deep dive every day. But there's so many different diets and lifestyles and ways of living. So, you have paleo, you have vegan, you have keto. How do you know which is right for you and your body?
I think there are some fundamental principles that would apply to all those different diets, actually. So it's mainly unprocessed food. You're cutting out the junk. It's largely vegetables. Even the paleo folks would concede that a lot of their diet is made up by vegetables, with the inclusion of some good quality meats. You're getting more fiber than the average diet. You're having a rich variety of all those different ingredients. So, as much as the media and purveyors of those particular diets like to point out the differences, I think actually a lot of similarities exist. And whenever you compare it to the standard Western diet, which is pretty poor in all those things that I just mentioned, you're obviously going to have beneficial effects, right? So I think the first step is like getting people to the very basics, and I would think that 80% of the issues that are attributed to poor diet and lifestyle would be able to be fixed by making those changes. And there becomes like more of a personalization issue. Okay, if you're intolerant to certain grains, if you don't fare well with particular types of greens because of the oxalate level, maybe there is something in your genomic history that would make you better functioning on high quality fats than other people. Those sort of differences, I think, can only really be fine tuned by investigations. And I think we're learning a lot more about how we can do that with the use of metabolomics, looking at our microbiota, using stool testing, as well as genomics as well. So simple genomic tests that can give us some sense of like what diets might be useful for you, and then also intuition as well, like how you feel after eating certain things. There was a really wonderful study just looking at weight that I always talk about. It's called the A to Z study. They basically put people on these various diets and kept them on their chosen diet for 12 months. And the people that fared the best, and the main measure they were looking at, which was weight loss, were all the diets as long as they were able to stick with it. And so people who are most aligned to the diet that suited their lifestyle, their convenience, their taste, those fared better on those diets. So it doesn't really matter about the diet. It matters about how you can consistently eat that way every day, which sort of spills over into what the main problem I find. It's not the type of diet that people need to focus on that is specific to the unique needs. It's actually consistency. And if you think about like my own diet or your own diet or anyone listening to this over the last week, have you been consistently eating well? Most people can't really say that they have. I mean, Jubilee celebrations this week, I know I'm going to be eating like loads of cake and quiche and stuff on Friday. a whole bunch of other people would have had like big weekends. We ebb and flow just because that's our environment. And sometimes, you go to work and you can't find something that's healthy for you. We have all these issues, and I think that's the issue that we need to try and tackle rather than the personalization element. I think that's almost like the cherry on top.
I completely agree. And I think with all these different diets and all of this information to say that you should restrict this and you should keep this, you don't know what's good for your body, but then you also become very fearful of foods. So, I know a lot of people that are scared to eat fruit. A lot of people that are worried about eating anything that has any source of fat in it, because we've been told that our whole lives, right? And it's almost about reprogramming that. How do you change that fearness around food? Because I think it's not only fairness, it's also you have a lot of guilt. So like you said, this weekend you'll be eating a lot of quiche, a lot of cake. When you know you're then being inconsistent and you know that it doesn't align to what your body needs, how do you eat and not have this association of guilt attached to it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think, particularly over the pandemic, we've seen a lot more people reaching out for help with eating related disorders. And I think it exists on a spectrum where you get some information about foods that leads to guilt and that can spiral into shame. And if you go further down that spiral of shame, it can really lead to some negative self thoughts that can manifest in the most extreme situations of eating disorders, self harm, and that's all sort of mixed into the umbrella where the root cause, I think, really comes down to the little voice in your head. And how much you want to listen to it. Because I think we're all going to have thoughts of a nature, and the object isn't really to rid ourselves of those, it's to check ourselves. So instead of me trying to rid myself of the thought that okay, this weekend I'm going to need to exercise pretty hard because I'm going to be going ham on the food and stuff this week. For some people, that's like completely fine. It's not going to lead them to this thought process of, okay, every time I eat, I need to make sure it's exactly calorie balanced. And the only way I can do that is if I exercise after every single meal. But for some people, it can, and that's the wrong sort of relationship to have with your food. So it really comes down to the individual. So broadly speaking, without going to specifics, is education around actually what happens when you consume food. And B, I think it really comes down to something that is a lot more upstream in terms of where that problem is actually potentially coming from. It's that negative self-talk, like how do you actually speak to yourself in the environment that is in your mind. I think that's really, really important. And that really doesn't get enough attention. It's very external. It's like, okay, this person is telling me about this food and that's bad for me. Actually, you should be able to tolerate your external environment by looking after your internal environment. So those are my sort of broad level thoughts on that. It gets a lot deeper, I guess, in terms of negative self-talk.
Yeah, and I think so many of us don't recognize that we're saying those things to ourselves. So I've heard so many people say it. I've even said it in the past before, if I eat Domino's, I have to go to the gym the next day and I have to burn X amount of calories and I have to work out this hard. And I think so many of us do it so subconsciously, and it's only recently that I've noticed that that's a really toxic way to think, because eating one pizza, maybe if I ate it every weekend, would have an effect on my body, but having it once in a while isn't going to have an effect on my body, so I don't need to work out like a lunatic. And I think often some people are like, I know I don't need to, but I just feel like I have to. And one of the things that I saw that you spoke about was the nocebo effect. Am I saying it right?
Yeah.
I found that really interesting. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah. And just to touch on that last point, I think, which I think is really important, is some people can have that relationship with food where they're like, oh, okay, I gotta work out at the gym, man. I've had a big week. And that's okay for them. And I think you've got to figure out what's okay for you, such that it doesn't lead to a net negative thought process when it comes to food. I talk about this guy that I saw in clinic, it was probably about a year ago. He was like, yeah, I've had a bit of junk food, I need to really clean up my diet. And anyone that's been in the health and wellness industry for long enough knows that there's certain words you tend to not be able to say anymore, and one of them is clean, like clean eating. This whole clean sort of talk that led to a lot of toxicity. But what I realized in that moment is, for that person, the word clean doesn't have as many negative connotations for him. And that's okay because he's okay with that. As long as it doesn't spiral into anything else, that's fine. So it really depends on the type of person you are, and whether that sort of negative self speak is actually reinforcing something that's bad, or something that could actually help you stick to the straight and narrow. Anyway, so that was just to round off that point. So the nocebo effect. So I think most people have heard of the placebo effect, which is where you are given an inert substance that leads to a positive outcome, whether that be physiological, whether it be psychological. I think there's a lot intertwined in that. The nocebo is essentially the opposite of that. So where I say this muffin that I'm giving you is going to give you bloating, or it's going to give you the runs, or it's going to constipate you, and I've implanted that message into your mind such that you'll have that direct effect and that actual response to it, even if there was nothing in the muffin to suggest any of that outcome. And so that's a very sort of primitive example of the nocebo effect. And I think we do this inadvertently with food. So if I have given you the impression that gluten is bad for you, and I give you a food with all those preconceptions about gluten causing bloating or skin issues or brain fog and all the rest of it, you may have that reaction to it. And I think, with all the information that we have out there and how much people might latch on to, it's really important that we're aware of this nocebo effect, because I think the psychological state in which we eat, again, hasn't really been given that much attention, and I think it's really, really important. So one of the things that I try to do with food is take a moment, slow down before I eat, make sure I'm not rushing it, and make sure I sort of appreciate where this food has come from, like the watercress in the UK, or the asparagus that's in season, or the fiber that's going to be building up my micros. All these different things, I try and, as silly as it sounds, I try and attach as much positive energy and positive knowledge to what I'm consuming, because I know that's going to have a desired positive effect. So I'd rather have the placebo than the nocebo.
It's funny you say that, because I think that's very much linked to what we were saying before around this fear of foods. So I tested this with one of my friends, and they came round and they asked for a coffee. So I said, "Oh, sorry, I've only got cow's milk," and they were like, "Oh, that's fine, but my stomach always hurts, and I think I'm allergic to it, and I think I'm lactose intolerant." And I was like, "Okay," and they were like, "But I'll just have it because it's fine. It's only once in a while." And then for the rest of the day, they're like, "My tummy hurts. It was definitely the cow's milk. I knew I was allergic to it." And then I was like, "It was oat milk." And they were like, "What?" And I was like, I think often we just put things into our minds, things that we read online, things that we see in the media, and say, "I'm definitely allergic to it," or, "It's definitely not good for me, and it definitely is so bad for you. So my body just can't hack it." And I know that. And what I mean by that as well is people say that often about eating late at night. I think for so many years, we were told that you can't eat late at night because it makes you gain weight, or it makes you put on whatever, or it makes you feel bloated, or all of these things. And whilst to some extent that could be true to some people, I think these generalist statements people apply themselves to and then just say it affects them in that way. And so when I heard about you talking about that, I thought it was so powerful, because I think so many of us do it subconsciously due to the things that we see online.
Yeah. It's a really cool experiment you did, but it's also something I think we do naturally to ourselves all day long, and we don't really think about it. Um, some people might see it in a positive way, like if they're eating Rivita crackers all day long, or salads, and they feel that's good for them and stuff. It can, yeah, it can be reinforcing and motivating for people, but in a lot of cases, um, given the media cycles are usually latched onto negative headlines, it's quite easy to fall into that trap. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people with intolerances out there who definitely need help and alternatives and all the rest of it. But that's not the majority. And unfortunately, a lot more people feel that they have issues with food when it's actually more rooted in the way we approach it rather than the food itself.
Absolutely. And I think it's because food is so emotive for us. So many of us eat when
Yeah.
we're happy. I actually, when I'm sad, can't eat. I can only eat if I'm feeling happy. So if I'm stressed or if I'm worried or if I'm upset, I don't feel like I want to eat anything. And one of my next questions to you is, so many people feel like they need to break out of that habit of emotional eating. What are some of your tips on how people break out of them?
I think first of all, it comes down to um, the information that you're privy to. So I'm a big believer in curating your digital environment. That's why I actively tell people to unfollow me in a lot of cases. Like we make a point at least once a month to remind people that they have a choice to follow and unfollow accounts that serve them or at least recognize which accounts are doing them a disservice. I've unfollowed a whole bunch of toxic accounts that I don't feel are good for my mental health. In fact, my feed is mainly like good food, good mood movement. I think it's called spread love movement, upworthy, like things that basically just like add positive messages to my mind. Because you switch over to Twitter and it's the exact opposite. So I think finding information that suits you is best. Eating intuitively, so ensuring that you're slowing down and recognizing what it took for the food to get to your plate, and actually how grateful and privileged we all are to have food in front of us. I think the cost of living crisis is sort of making everyone aware of that these days. And I think also sort of if you recognizing if there is a problem that is bigger than the one that you can solve yourself, super important. So reaching out for help. GPs are becoming a lot more open-minded and responsive and receptive to the ideas around eating disorders, as well as providing people with the appropriate avenues for treatment if required, because it is becoming an issue. The sort of real sort of spectrum of emotional eating that can lend itself to eating disorders. So I think that's super important, and also like checking your mindset in terms of like your internal voice, because if you fix sort of your alignment with happiness and um, the way in which you consume food and talk about yourself, I think that's probably going to be really, really important when it comes to the net effect on emotional eating.
You talk a lot about eating as a way for healing your body. Tell me a
Mm.
little bit more about that. How can we heal our bodies with the power of nutrition?
So a number of ways. Yeah, yeah. I'll give you sort of no, that's all right. I'll give you sort of the broader perspective. I mean, the concept of food as medicine is not really new. What's your background? Are you Indian or?
I'm Indian, yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. So, you're probably not a stranger to the concept of food as medicine. It's very much entrained and coupled to Ayurveda and sort of what our parents and grandparents have been telling us for years. Um, the impact of spices, the importance of the gut as the root to all health and ill health. Um, as well as the importance of lifestyle that supports everything else as well. So, food is one of those foundations that I think everyone needs to recognize as a critical preventative role in medicine. And the way I like to sort of space it out is food can be seen as preventative medicine, supportive medicine, and as the medicine in the minority of cases. So, preventative medicine, there's swaths of studies that demonstrate when you eat a more plant-based diet, when you have a lot more fiber in your diet, when you have more fruits and vegetables in your diet, when you have adequate amounts of nutrients that come from nuts and seeds and beans, and you're getting enough protein and you're getting enough fiber that support your gut microbes, you have a massive reduction in your risk and propensity towards cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, and neurodegenerative disease, all the conditions of our time that we know are related to our lifestyles and poor eating habits. So there's like a huge sort of evidence base around how we can see food as preventive medicine. It can also be used in a supportive manner. So whether you're having surgery and you're recovering, or even such things as chemotherapy in a supportive manner, we know that there is some research now that people with better diets, people with more fruits and vegetables, people with better gut health can potentially respond better to certain treatments. So there is a huge role in a complementary manner for food as well. And in the minority of cases, it can be the treatment. The one that I think a lot more medics have come around to the idea of is the quite restrictive ketogenic diet when it comes to treatment refractory epilepsy in pediatrics. In fact, that's the first line therapy in certain hospitals in America, and I believe in the UK as well. We did a whole podcast episode on ketogenic diets. And so there are a multitude of different ways in which we can use food in a medicinal manner. And I think it's becoming a lot more sort of commonplace to talk about it. When I started, it was not really the norm, to talk about food as medicine. But I think now we're really recognizing the importance of it and how we can do it. And actually, it's one of the reasons why I started my app, the sort of Headspace for Healthy Eating, because getting to the crux of the problem is actually about consistently eating well. And if we can provide a default digital environment where every choice you make is a healthy one that is actually supporting your well-being and supporting your gut, supporting all the different mechanisms that improve the way your body functions, like that's really what we should be aiming for. And it's easier to curate your digital environment than it is to curate your physical environment, although the two are becoming quite intertwined with delivery systems, logistics, online supermarkets, and all the rest of it. So, yeah.
Now, I recently recorded a podcast with the founders of Dirty. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they've created a brand around the power of mushrooms and how they can actually heal your body. And they were telling me that the gut is like the second brain. And one of the things that really stood out to me was they were saying that mushrooms are used for medicinal purposes. They're the only ingredient within pills that don't give you the side effects. Do you feel like we still need parts of the pharmaceutical industry to help heal us, or we can do that totally through food?
Oh, I think we definitely need the pharmaceutical industry for treatment for sure. Absolutely. So, I mean, as a doctor that's been working in the healthcare system for nearly 15 years, I think I've got a deep appreciation for the need for uh, treatments, as blunt as they are. So, like antibiotics, for example, is a blunt tool to treat bacteria, and we know that the way we use antibiotics needs to change because of antimicrobial resistance. The utility of vaccines and antiviral treatments, I think, has been demonstrated over the last couple of years in particular. But looking back even further, when we take for granted all the things like measles, mumps, rubella, a whole bunch of conditions that we don't see anymore. I remember when I was chatting to some of the nurses that were a little bit older than me, they used to see uh, uh, influenza cases, epiglottitis with kids coming in, they can't breathe, you have to give them steroids. It was scary, scary scenarios. I've never seen that because I've grown up in an era where all the kids get Hib vaccinations. So it's a really, really important feature of medicine that I don't think should ever go away. However, when it comes to the areas where lifestyle is the root cause of what we're seeing, yes, I believe that the pharmaceuticals that we use to stabilize blood sugar or even reduce cholesterol to thin the blood, all this sort of elements that we use that are important at a late stage can be prevented, and our use of those can be massively dropped if we can focus on the root cause issues, which are lifestyle. So there's definitely like a push and pull between it, but I definitely think the two go hand in hand rather than an either or.
Absolutely. I don't think there is an either or, because there are times in which you are too late in a certain area and you do need that medicine. And for example, I think there's so many cases in which people just think, okay, well, if I eat healthy, I'll never incur any problem. And I think that's also not true as well, because there are different factors to what leads you to different conditions. So eating healthy is really important, and it can be a way to prevent a lot of diseases, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're immune from everything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I know this was really short, and hopefully one day we can record in person in a studio and deep dive into these issues and take a longer look at your app and how you're helping so many people around the world. But I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time this morning.
I appreciate it. My pleasure, Shivani, and good luck with it all. And yeah, thanks for hanging out this morning.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening or watching, if you could press the like, follow and subscribe button, it would mean the world to me.